Welcome to John's Box, my YouTube channel, and to this month's edition of Lists, where I'm going to be ranking every British Prime Minister post-war, that means since 1945, those who actually saved Britain. 75 years, 17 leaders, one office that can build a nation or break a career. Since the end of World War II, the British Prime Minister has gone from managing the sunset of an empire to navigating the digital age. But who was actually the best, and who left the country in the worse state than they found it? Today, we're ranking every post-war Prime Minister since the Second World War. We're scoring them out of 100 based on 5 clinical metrics. 1. Length of service. 2. Foreign achievements. 3. Domestic impact. 4. Economic management. And 5. National security. We'll get into the scores, but before we do so, here's a word from me, your YouTube host. Hello, I'm John, and welcome to John's Box, my YouTube channel. And in the first of my top list series, I'm gonna rank all 18, not 17, as in the introduction, all 18 post-war British Prime Ministers, so that's from 1945 up until the present one. I'm going to do it in reverse order, from the worst to the best, according to 5 categories, as I've already mentioned: the length of service, foreign achievement, domestic impact, economic management, and national security. Each of those categories are ranked out of 20 using my secret algorithm, and you'll find out who was the best and the worst. See if you agree with my top, at least my top and my bottom one. Yep, of course I stand to be corrected. This is only this is an objective matter, I'd like to say. It's not based on any of my political bias. So sit back and relax and enjoy the 18. See you at the end of the video. So we begin with the bottom tier, and in 18th place at the bottom of the list is Liz Truss, who was Prime Minister in 22 for 49 days. She scored 11 out of 100. She's the only Prime Minister to be outlasted by a head of a lettuce. Her mini-budget caused a genuine economic emergency, giving her the lowest economic score in British history. In 17th place is Sir Anthony Eden, who was Prime Minister between 1955 and 1957. With a score of 28 out of 100, the Suez Crisis wasn't just a military failure, but it was the moment the world realised Britain was no longer a superpower. It destroyed his health and his career. Next up is the present Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, with a total score of 35 out of 100. That's in progress. So entering 2026, Starmer is in a danger zone. While his security score is solid due to NATO continuity, his domestic and economic scores have plummeted. With a net favourability of minus 57 this month, the public is losing patience. He has the majority to do great things, but the clock is ticking on his legacy. And who knows, with a leadership challenge from Andy Burnham on the horizon, it may not last. That is his prime ministership. Next up, in 15th place, is Theresa May, with a score of 37 out of 100. She was Prime Minister between 2016 and 2019, and her Prime Ministership is defined by Brexit and Brexit alone. While her tenure was a 3-year stalemate in Parliament, it saw her lose her majority and her authority. In 14th place is Rishi Sunak with a score of 41 out of 100. He gets credit for stabilising the markets after the 2022 meltdown, but his short term meant he lacked the time to leave a lasting domestic footprint. 13th place, equal, is Boris Johnson with a score of 42 points out of 100, who scores high on foreign policy for his early decisive support of Ukraine, but Partygate and domestic chaos dragged his score down. On the same points as Boris Johnson, on 42 out of 100, is Sir Alec Douglas-Home, who was Prime Minister between 1963 and 1964. He was one of the shortest serving PMs, lasting just 363 days. He was an aristocratic figure who famously admitted he used matchsticks to work out economic problems. He was a placeholder Prime Minister who nearly pulled off a miracle election win against Harold Wilson, but he was ultimately seen as a man out of his time. Sir Alec Douglas-Home, that is. In 11th equal is David Cameron, who was Prime Minister between 2010 and 2016, and his score is anchored by a decade-long economic policy of austerity, not to mention the Brexit referendum, which he actually called, hoping that the vote would be Remain, but to his shock and despair, the result was to leave, and he resigned on the following day of the referendum result. He was also Prime Minister of the coalition government with the Lib Dems. His score is 50 out of 100. Also in 11th equal, with the same score as David Cameron, so that's 50 out of 100, is Sir Edward Heath, who was Prime Minister between 1970 and 1974, and his greatest achievement was taking Britain into the European Economic Community, the precursor to the European Union. His term was defined by the 3-day week, power cuts, and a disastrous standoff with the coal miners and other miners. Heath was a man of principle who won a surprise election in 1970, but his domestic agenda was shattered by the 1973 oil crisis. He remains the most pro-European Prime Minister in British history. So it's now the top 10, and opening this is James Callaghan, who was Prime Minister from 1976 to 1979. His score is 51 out of 100 and is heavily dragged down by the winter of discontent, where strikes paralysed the country and inflation soared. He's a former Foreign Secretary who was adept at managing the special relationship with Jimmy Carter. Callaghan is the only person to have held all 4 great offices of state. He was a steady hand, but he ultimately couldn't hold back the tide of trade union unrest that paved the way for Margaret Thatcher. In 9th place then, with a score of 59 points, is Gordon Brown, who was Prime Minister between 2007 and 2010. Economy is his defining category. While he was Prime Minister during the 2008 financial crash, many historians credit him with saving the world banking system through his recapitalization plan. He was highly respected on the global stage for his work on international development and G20 leadership. Brown waited a decade for the top job, only to inherit a global economic wildfire. He was a brilliant chancellor, but struggled as a communicator in the age of 24-hour news. That's Gordon Brown. In 8th place, with a score of 60 points out of 100, is Sir Winston Churchill, and we're only looking at his term of Prime Ministership between 1951 and 1955. We know he was Prime Minister during the Second World War, of course. He mostly focused on foreign affairs. His domestic policy was largely Attlee light, as he didn't want to roll back the new welfare state. He stayed too long, and by his final year, his health was failing, and he was often incapacitated by strokes. This is the most controversial ranking, and if this were 1940, he'd be 100 out of 100. But as a post-war Prime Minister, He was an aging lion, more interested in his place in history and his relationship with Eisenhower than in fixing Britain's crumbling post-war infrastructure. Sir Winston Churchill. In 7th place, with a total score of 61 out of 100, is Sir John Major, who was Prime Minister between 1990 and 1997. His reputation was savaged by Black Wednesday, but he actually laid down the groundwork for the economic boom Tony Blair eventually inherited. He took the first difficult secret steps towards the Northern Ireland peace process, and he was often mocked for being grey, but history has been kinder to Major recently. He was the bridge between the radicalism of Thatcher and the optimism of Blair, holding a fractured Conservative Party together against the odds. That's Sir John Major. In 6th place, with a total score of 65 points out of 100, is Harold Wilson, who served in 2 terms, the first being from 1964 to 1970, and the last term from 1974 to 1976 before he resigned. The white heat of technology, which he often oversaw as massive social liberalisation, decriminalising homosexuality and abolishing capital punishment. His greatest achievement was perhaps what he didn't do. He kept British troops out of the Vietnam War despite heavy US pressure. Wilson was a master tactician who won 4 general elections. While he struggled with the unions and the stagnant economy, he successfully dragged Britain's social laws into the 20th century. That's Harold Wilson. In 4th place then was Harold Macmillan, Prime Minister between 1957 and 1963 with a score of 70 out of 100 points. He was famous for telling the public they'd never had it so good, and he presided over a consumer boom. He navigated the wind of change in Africa, gracefully managing the decolonization of the empire. Macmillan was the ultimate Edwardian gentleman in a modernizing world. He restored the special relationship with the US after the Suez disaster, though his legacy was eventually tarnished by the Profumo sex scandal. That's Sir Harold Macmillan. Now it's the top 3. In 3rd place is Tony Blair, Prime Minister between 1997 and 2007, with a total score of 76 out of 100. He was the architect of the minimum wage, devolution, and massive investment in schools. The Good Friday Agreement was a triumph for him, and, however, Iraq was his undoing. Blair was the ultimate what if. If not for the Iraq War, he might have challenged Attlee for the top spot. He presided over the longest period of sustained economic growth in modern British history. That is Tony Blair. In 2nd place then is the first woman Prime Minister, namely Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister between 1979 and 1990, with a score of 82 out of 100, and she gave us the 11 years that reshaped the political landscape. She was controversial, and she broke the sick man of Europe cycle through radical privatisation. Love her or hate her, you cannot ignore her. She's the only Prime Minister on this list to have an ism named after her. Her security score remains high due to the Falklands, but her domestic score is a battleground of social division. That's Margaret Thatcher. And in 1st place, with a score of 83 out of 100, is Clement Attlee, who was Prime Minister between 1945 and 1951. He built the modern UK. The NHS and the welfare state are his legacy. He secured Britain's place as a nuclear power and was the founding father of NATO. He wasn't flashy. Churchill once called him a modest man with much to be modest about, but historians almost always rank him number 1. He transformed a bankrupt post-war nation into a modern social democracy. That's Clement Attlee, who's the number 1. And for a short summary, when we look at the full list from Attlee to Starmer, what is the common thread? The PMs who scored above 70 all shared one trait. They had a clear, transformative project for Britain. Attlee had the welfare state, Thatcher had the free market, Blair had modernisation. The Prime Ministers who fall into the 40s and 50s, like Heath, Callaghan and Sunak, were often talented individuals who became hostages to fortune, trapped by economic crises or internal party civil wars. And then there's the bottom tier, where leaders like Eden and Truss serve as a warning. In the high-stakes world of number 10, one wrong move on the global stage or the financial markets can end a legacy in weeks. And now it's back to me, your YouTube host, for a final word. So there you have it. There you have it. What a surprise. I wonder if you're all old enough to remember Clement Attlee, at least in service. You must be very old if you do. Yep. So what is your top 3 or top 5 in that order? Tell me in the comments whether you agree or disagree with me, and of course your preference. Don't forget also to support my channel. I've just crossed that threshold of over 1,000 subscribers, so I'm looking to increase that. So don't forget to like or dislike my video and to write something in the comments. I'll be back in February for another top list. So be there or be square.